Alright guys, today I'm going to show you how I built this environment scene for my Blender low poly mermaid character. It's relatively simple, there's just a few tricks, but they're not too complicated, so let's jump into it. This is what the final scene is going to look like, and this is typically how I like to lay out my Blender scenes, where I have the rendered one on the left, a viewport gray box render on the right, and then whatever I'm working on, whether it be shading or animation down here. Just to quickly walk you through this, it's going to be a plane, and then the world is going to have a background with a volume. And then to make the light, we're going to have this plane have a noise texture on it that's animated, and that is going to act as a mask for this spotlight that's shining through it. And because this is a mask, it's going to create rays of light and this fake caustic pattern on the bottom of the seafloor. So this is really what makes the scene. Everything else is really simple. And before I go any further, I just want to let you guys know I've got this Blender file up on a Substack as well as Patreon, just so you have an option if you want to purchase it. It is a little bit cheaper on Patreon. It's $3, whereas on Substack it is $5 because that is the minimum membership requirement. So anyway, this Blender file was made in Blender 4.1, but since then I've updated to 4.2 with the new Eevee renderer. This looks the exact same between the two, so I don't think you need to use 4.2, but I just like to stay updated to the most recent Blender file, so really you just need to turn volumes on. Okay, so I'm not going to build everything from scratch, but I'll try and do most of it to walk you guys through. So we're going to start by adding a ground plane, and you can do that with Shift A, coming to mesh and hitting plane. And I'm not too worried about scale for this because it's a pretty simple render, but just in general, you want to try and make things to scale so that physics and lights will work realistically, but since this is an Eevee and it's underwater, I'm really not worried about that. Once you have your plane, you can see it has no subdivisions in it, and I'm going to be using a displace modifier to make it kind of wavy and undulate like sand piles on the ground. So first I am going to subdivide it with a subdivision surface, and I like to do simple for this so it doesn't round the edges. If I applied it so you can see what that looks like, it retains the square shape, but it just subdivided it for you. But I don't need to apply it, so it can stay editable. Then we're going to add a displace, and to use a displacer you do need to make a new noise texture, and to access that noise and edit it, you go down to this little box, grid box at the bottom. And then I like to start with distorted noise, and as you can see that's way too strong. But once you go back to the modifier menu, you can mess with the strength, and it doesn't have enough detail, so I'm going to raise the subdivisions. And like I said, this is supposed to be low poly, so I think that could be good. And I'm just going to add another subdivision to smooth out all of this noise, and I think that is enough detail. I'm then just going to do shade smooth so it doesn't have all of those little squares in there. And that looks good. So to add the rocks, so you're going to press Control, comma, or you can go to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and you should be able to type in extra mesh objects and check that if it's not installed because you're in 4.2 and they changed it to a repository. You'll just go to Get Extensions and type in extra mesh objects, and if I did not already have it installed, it would just have the install button and you would just click that. You're going to do add mesh extra objects and rock generator, and it will procedurally add a mesh that you can mess with all of these settings. I think for the most part I took down the detail level and I did not smooth it, and I think I took this off. Yeah, so I deleted one of the subsurface modifiers. I suppose we should do the lights before I go any further, because there's just this weird glow coming from her. If you want to see how I made her, I have other tutorials in this playlist. That light that's showing up in the viewport render is her emission. As far as the lights, I'm not gonna make a brand new light. I'll just turn on the one I already have. But if you want to add a spotlight, you just press Shift A and go down to light and then spotlight. You can also use an area light. So that's literally the light. It's just a spotlight with a pretty big radius. These are my settings right here, pretty big size. So this is what I'm talking about with spotlights. You can control this really easily. And then the other thing we're gonna do is we are going to add the scene background because this looks really ugly. So I initially added, just this will come default, the background node, but if you don't know how to find it, just press Shift A and type background. And I put just a blue color behind there at the default strength. And then I'm gonna add a volume. If you don't know what a volume is, it's basically how the light interacts with the air particles. That's how I like to think about it. I'm just gonna plug that in. And this is gonna take some trial and error once we have other things in there, but you can kind of see it's altering the color of the background. And you can see it's creating some really subtle light streaks where it's interacting with her and she's blocking it. But again, this is gonna change once we have more things in there. So, like I said, I'm not gonna make everything from scratch. So I'm gonna add back in my set. We're gonna delete this guy. So the only difference between this ground and the ground I already had is that there's a texture on it. Basically, I just downloaded a sand texture. Yeah, 3dtextures.me and plugged in the nodes correctly. So I've got the base color, the normal going into my bump map, and then the height map going into displacement, which I actually think I don't have plugged in correctly. It should go into here. And then these are the rocks I made with the rock generator. Here are the super simple materials. Like I said, this is supposed to look like a retro game, so it really doesn't need to be that much detail in these things. These I just box modeled. So let's see if I can show you what they look like without a subdivision. A square that was modeled. And then I put a subdivision surface and just duplicated it. And then I can show you how I made the coral. Here are the textures. You're going to add a single vertice. You're going to bring that into tab mode. And I just isolated by pressing the slash. And then I'm going to extrude it. And I'm going to add a skin modifier to it. So initially when you add it, it looks super messed up. In edit mode, you're going to select it and press Ctrl A, and that will allow you to scale it, something like that. And then you can turn on smooth shading, and I'm just did that, so I kept the low poly blocky look. But if you wanted it to be rounder, you can add a subdivision surface and subdivide it as much as you want. The cool thing about the skin modifier is you can kind of extract from other points, so you don't, like, it'll automatically join it for you. So you don't have to worry about basically connecting anything. It'll just do it for you. This would also be a good way to make like tree branches, and you can go in different directions. And I really like this modifier. Again, if you just want to scale down one point to taper it, you just select it and press Ctrl A, and then it will be pointy. But that does not look good for coral. But anyway, and it'll automatically add your subdivision. It's just super cool. So let's see what that looks like. Coral. How quick and fun. Oh, it's really small. Okay, and then you can just scale it however you want and apply the same texture to it. I'm gonna delete that. That we have the set in there. Let's mess with the volumes so you can see what I'm doing with the world. So without the volume, it looks like that. So you can see all the way back. If I had this background set to 0, it would just look black, which actually, you might not need to have a background on there. Yeah, I guess you don't even really need this background node. So for the volumes, I just changed the color, and then the density is going to be the most important attribute in there. So I'm pretty sure when you bring it in, it's going to be set to 1, and obviously that is way too dark. So It's gonna be up to you how intense you want this, but I wanted it to be a more cheerful scene. So something around here is perfect for me. I do lose that rock in the background, so I would bring that forward just so I can catch it. But this is just really nice so you don't have to worry about making an entire background. And it's going to really help when we add the reflections on the ground. The most important part is going to be this mask that I made, and that's just filtering the light. To understand what it's doing, I'm going to turn my material preview on. And as you can see, it's got this pattern on it. And to look at how I did that, there is another tutorial I watched that kind of goes over this, and I'll link it in the description. But basically, I'm using 2 Voronoi textures that are layered with a color mixer, and this one is subtracting from this one. It's creating these pockets of lines that look like a water pattern, and the light is shining through these areas. And I keyframed the width section of the Voronoi so that it's moving, and that's what's making this pattern down there. Let's set it up from scratch. Going to make a new material, Shift A, Voronoi texture. We're gonna introduce that into there. We're going to change this to 4D, and that just adds this extra toggle for the W, which I'm assuming stands for width, but either way, it's just kind of so you can manually manipulate the pattern. To make a mapping node, and you can just do that with Control T. Just make sure you have Node Wrangler turned on in your add-ons. Going to duplicate this, mix color node. These 2 in together, a difference. So right now these are perfectly symmetrical, which is not what we want, because you want some space to create those lines. Going to add a value node, and I'm doing this so I can plug it into both Voronois. I can make sure what I want to be symmetrical is symmetrical. We're also gonna change this to smooth F1 because that just looks better. And then in the smoothness value, plug that in and do 0.24. And the key to this is adding a math node to this one, so it slightly changes the value of one versus the other. And that's going to help give us those lines in the mask. I'm going to make another value node and change this to 13.4. This is totally up to you what you want the scale to be. This is just what I thought looked best. And then we're going to make another value node, which again, I'm just going to duplicate because that's easier, but you can also just add a new one. And we're going to plug this into the W. And this is what's going to be animated to cause the changes in the pattern. So as you can see, we're starting to get these lines right there. Very nice. We're going to add a color ramp to kind of control the contrast between the two. So you can see, can make it really contrasty. This we're going to slide to 1, and that's just the factor. So right now this texture is not going to be a mask because it does not have transparency to it. So to add transparency, we're going to plug in this color to the alpha. This is actually the opposite of what we want. Right now it's letting the light shine through the middle when we want it to have just the borders, because if you look at sand underwater, you're gonna see this pattern on the ground. So to better replicate that, we are going to invert with an invert color node. And there we go. So you can see that the light is shining in the lines rather than the middle of the shapes. If you don't think that these lines are broad enough, you can just mess with the color ramp to make them more or less apparent. And that is pretty much the general idea. So right now it's not animated because I haven't keyframed it, but if we go back to this node and we start at 1, let me bring up a timeline. If at this frame, you press I over the value. We go over here and we say, move it to 6.5. It is now keyframed. And that's way too fast. So to edit that, I can open the graph editor, and this is the material. So I'm just going to bring it way down. See if that's better. It's still way too fast. So I like this. Blender by default brings things in with an ease in and ease out. I do not want that because that makes it slowly ramp up to moving. So to change that, you press T in the menu and select linear, and then it's just animating at the same speed the entire time. And that looks good. So I think that pretty much wraps it up, guys. That is the basic idea. And then I know it looks really dotty right here, but if you go ahead and render it, it will smooth it out. For my Eevee settings, I didn't change anything from my previous Blender 4.0 or 4.1 file, but these are the volume settings I have. As far as I know, the higher you go, the less resolution you're gonna have, so it'll get really blocky and chunky, which actually could work for like going for that low poly look. If we render that, yeah, it just has less detail, but this is the default setting it comes in with. You can mess with all of these settings, and like I said, I didn't really touch anything else in here. I hope this was helpful. Like I said, you can buy this project file if you don't want to make it yourself, and you can get this fully rigged mermaid. And thank you for watching if you made it this far. Let me know down in the comments if you have any questions, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye!